Good morning to all. I'm John Marchari, head of the Department of Drawings and Prints and curatorial chair here at the Morgan Library Museum. And on behalf of all my colleagues, I'd like to welcome you to today's Reflecting on Rembrandt Symposium. This event was originally planned to take place in person at the Morgan today, but as you all realize, we've had to change course. I'm grateful to all of our speakers for still agreeing to participate, even in this virtual format. A silver lining of a sort, however, is that our international symposium is now far more international than we could ever have imagined. In addition to speakers in Amsterdam, Oxford, Kingston, Ontario, and various cities on the east coast of the US, we have audience members as far away as Mumbai, Melbourne, and Kyoto. We filled all 500 slots available on the Zoom account. Thank you all for coming. The Morgan has always been a center of study for Rembrandt. As many of you know, we hold one of the greatest collections of his prints, more than 20 drawings by the master, and scores more by his students and followers. We've held a number of Rembrandt exhibitions over the years, most recently Rembrandt's first masterpiece, held in 2016, which focused on the Judas returning the 30 pieces of silver, but looked at a range of the artist's early work. It thus makes sense that we should have hosted an event to reflect on the many shows organized in 2019 to commemorate the 350th anniversary of Rembrandt's death. But I need to give credit to my colleague and co-organizer, Laura Jaeger-Krasselt, curator at the Leiden Collection, for coming up with the idea for this program. It's been a very happy collaboration, and we are grateful to the Leiden Collection for their assistance in planning and supporting the costs of this event. Before I turn things over to Lara, I'd like to set out a few organizational ground rules. First, in condensing what was originally a half-day symposium into a 2-hour Zoom, we've put ourselves on a very tight timeline. So we'll keep our introductions brief, and we'll do them as we switch PowerPoints from one speaker to the next. For the same reason, we're going to hold questions until the end of the symposium. After our speakers finish their presentations, Arthur Wheelock and Larry Silver will serve as respondents, and then we'll lead off a question and answer session with our panelists. If you do have questions, however, feel free to type them into the Q&A function, which you can access at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You can type these at any time, and Laura and I will then try to pose the questions to the speakers during the discussion time at the end of the symposium. Apologies in advance to any that we don't manage to bring into the discussion. Finally, we'll have one brief 5-minute break halfway through our program. With those announcements out of the way, welcome again. Thank you for joining us, and I'll hand things over to Lara.
Thank you very much, John. And also thanks to our colleagues at the Morgan for their support in co-organizing this event with the Leiden Collection and what has really been a warm collaboration over this past year. I am so pleased to welcome you all here today, especially to our speakers who are joining us from across the globe. And as John said, we had planned to hold this event in person, but we're very glad that so many of you, also from around the world, are able to join us today virtually. The collaboration of this sort between the Morgan and the Leiden Collection, the former home to one of the greatest collection of Rembrandt's prints and drawings, and the latter a remarkable private collection of 17th century Dutch art, including 15 paintings by Rembrandt and 2 drawings, a selection of which I show you here, seem to be the most fitting way to reflect on Rembrandt in light of the Rembrandt year of 2019. This year marked the 350th anniversary of Rembrandt's death on October 4th, 1669, while our symposium today falls just about 1 year later, so we're celebrating the 351st anniversary, if you will. The Dutch artist Rembrandt van Rijn, who was born in Leiden and lived out the rest of his life in Amsterdam, was a painter, printmaker, and draftsman. His output was enormous in the 17th century, as it was extraordinary. Rembrandt was a storyteller of great biblical and mythological subjects, as well as the experiences of daily life and the human condition. He broke with tradition in numerous ways, from the depiction of the emotions and the passions of the soul as described by his contemporary Constantine Huygens, to his working methods, handling of light and shadow, and experimentation across media. his art has not ceased to captivate generations, to provoke, inspire, challenge, and amaze. Nearly 4 centuries after his death, his art continues to resonate with us, just as it continues to raise new questions. Despite all that we know about Rembrandt, he still shows us all that we don't, pushing us to evolve and grow in how we see and experience the artist and his work. This powerful effect is evident in the number and scope of exhibitions that took place this past anniversary. More than 50 exhibitions devoted to Rembrandt in 15 countries, some of which already began in 2018, and others that will open or stretch into 2021 and 2022. 2019 was certainly not the first Rembrandt year. It was preceded by those in 1906, 1956, 1969, and most recently in 2006. Exhibitions devoted to the artist have been presented in the intervening years as well. Yet these anniversaries provide a distinct point in time to pause, reflect, and reassess. They have come to represent a moment for celebration and opportunity. Exhibitions, new scholarship, and public events, much like this symposium, mark a united effort among museums and scholars to celebrate and re-examine Rembrandt's artistic production, his historical significance, as well as the broader state of the field. 2019 was certainly no exception. This symposium explores some of the efforts of this long creative year and asks what happens when we stop and take stock of Rembrandt as a draftsman, printmaker, and painter after the year of Rembrandt. The exhibitions presented in the Rembrandt year have taken various approaches, stretching from the monographic to the thematic. Some of these shows were large-scale endeavors drawn from many international loans and included paintings, prints, and drawings, while others were small and focused on maybe one aspect of the artist's oeuvre. We'll hear about a number of these projects today, from the Rijksmuseum's showcase of all the Rembrandts in its collection, an exhibition that represented just one aspect of its celebrations of the Rembrandt year, to the reassessment of the young Rembrandt in Oxford and Leiden. The artist's social and personal networks were explored at the Rembrandt House, as well as investigations into Rembrandt's technical working methods and materials through the collaboration of several Dutch institutions. An important component to emerge within this exhibition research has been museums' efforts to present their findings in engaging and accessible ways to the scholarly community and to the public, creating a common ground for the sharing of knowledge and inspiring public imagination. Each of our speakers today have contributed to the scholarship on Rembrandt through their respective projects and institutions. We've asked them to reflect on the artist by looking backward and forward. Where have we come in the Rembrandt year, and what have we learned? Why does Rembrandt remain relevant and meaningful for wider audiences, and at the same time continue to prompt new scholarly debate? There are, of course, many exhibitions that we won't be able to discuss in detail today, or those that are still to come, but I would like to mention just a few of these here to suggest the breadth and depth of this anniversary year. A number of institutions across North America and Europe in particular took the opportunity to reassess or recontextualize their own Rembrandt collections and the work of his contemporaries. In Canada, for example, at an exhibition that first opened at the Agnes Etherington Art Centre, Rembrandt's youth was explored in his native Leiden in relation to the city's historical, cultural, and civic character around 1630. Rembrandt's family life, namely his marriage to Saskia van Ellenberg, was the subject of exhibitions in Leeuwarden and Kassel. Rembrandt's Amsterdam portraits were explored in Madrid. The artist as a scholar and dramatist could be seen in Cologne and now Prague. The master's depiction of light as a narrative, emotional, and experimental force was the focus of an exhibition at the Dulwich Picture Gallery. Rembrandt also went global. The Leiden collection brought the very first display of the artist's works to Louvre Abu Dhabi in collaboration with the Louvre Paris. This very weekend, Rembrandt's encounter with non-European cultures in Rembrandt's Orient will open in Basel and later in Potsdam. And in 2021, Stephanie Dickey's exhibition on Rembrandt in Amsterdam will open in Ottawa and Frankfurt. At the same time, technical research into Rembrandt's work, notably Operation Night Watch at the Rijksmuseum, will continue in real time before our eyes. These exhibitions and research projects show a thriving field. The contributors today will speak for themselves, of course, but I think this Rembrandt year has provided us with a number of fascinating avenues of exploration. A more critical look at Rembrandt's beginnings in Leiden and the concept of his genius. A more nuanced understanding of the artist as a person with lived experiences and meaningful connections in family and friends, and an artist who benefited from collaboration and dialogue in all parts of his life. The role of technical research and new methodologies and imaging techniques are both an enduring and ever-growing part of our study of the artist. Reconciling these scientific methods with the more traditional practice of connoisseurship, as well as the work done in museums and universities, are both essential and challenging tasks for the future. We hope that these discussions today will thus not only offer an opportunity for reflection, but also an impetus for continued inquiry and curiosity. Now I'm pleased to welcome our first speaker, Anne van Kamp, who is the curator, the Christopher Brown Curator of Northern European Art at the Ashmolean Museum at the University of Oxford. Anne joined the museum in 2015 after working first as a cataloger and then curator of Dutch and Flemish prints and drawings at the British Museum in London from 2006. There, she worked on their world-class Rembrandt holdings and co-curated a major international exhibition on metal point drawings entitled Drawings in Silver and Gold, which was shown at the National Gallery in Washington and the British Museum in 2015. More recently, Anne has collaborated with the Museum de Lakenhal in Leiden on a major exhibition focusing on Rembrandt as a young artist, the subject of her talk today. Please welcome Anne, who will be reflecting on the Ashmoleans' Young Rembrandt exhibition. Anne?
Thank you so much, Lara, and also John, for inviting me to this incredible study day. And it's a true honor to be with you in New York today, albeit in a very virtual way today. So when I was asked to participate, I sort of had to think long and hard, because it feels since I've joined the Ashmolean in 2015, like all I've been doing, all I've been working on is working on Rembrandt. So I'm going to try to squeeze in as much as possible of my reflections on Rembrandt in the next 20 minutes. And so the first project I worked on might be very, very familiar to Lara, which was Sensation, Rembrandt's first paintings, in which we did a very small display at the Ashmolean Museum about Rembrandt's very first allegories of the five senses, and of which 3 are, of course, in the Leiden collection in New York, as you can see in the slide here. And then as part of the Rembrandt year, the Ashmolean also wants to showcase its world-class collection of Rembrandt etchings. And so we've been touring 50 of our very best prints across the UK. The tour was, of course, halted by lockdown, but we'll resume again next spring with the final venue in Ireland in the Crawford Art Gallery in Cork. But what I mainly wanted to talk to you about today is my main project that I've been working on in the last 5 years, which is the Young Rembrandt exhibition. And this was a partnership with Museum de Lakenhal in Leiden and was co-curated by me, Christopher Brown, the former director of the Ashmolean Museum, and Christian Vogel, the curator at the Lakenhal in Leiden. And so the exhibition opened in Leiden in November last year as part of the Rembrandt celebrations in the Netherlands, and it then moved to Oxford in a slightly different way because of different loans in February. And so, of course, we all know what happened a few weeks later. So mid-March, all UK museums had to close, and so the Rembrandt exhibition also had to close. Luckily, we'd already crammed in quite a bit of public programming in the first 2 weeks. We've had fabulous talks by Martin Rolton-Kish. We had Gary Schwartz coming over. We had Simon Sharma coming over. We've also recorded some videos. But of course, with lockdown happening, that all shut down. But we didn't sit back and relax. We immediately created a virtual exhibition, which you can still access on the Ashmolean website. We released all the pre-recorded videos. I recorded a home video in my living room. We were also part of the BBC Museums in Quarantine documentary series, which Simon Sharma presented. So we were still very present, and at the moment we're working on a virtual 3D rendering of the exhibition, which we'll hopefully be able to share with you after the museum closes. So we were able to reopen in August, on the 10th of August, which was a huge relief for all of us, and thanks to our generous lenders who almost all agreed for their works to be kept in Oxford. And in fact, we're in the final days. And so on Sunday, the exhibition will finally close its doors, and I'm praying that we won't have another lockdown before Sunday, but so far it's looking positive in Oxford. So when Lara and John asked me to participate in this conference, for me it was very difficult because I feel like I'm still right in the middle of the Rembrandt year. Like the exhibition is still ongoing. I'm giving tours every morning, every night, after hours. I'm giving online talks every week. So it was very difficult for me to sort of sit back and reflect on Rembrandt and the young Rembrandt in particular. So what I don't want to do today is sort of give you a virtual overview of the exhibition, but really sort of think about what did I know or what did I think I knew when I was writing the catalogue, what has changed in the meantime, and how I incorporated that in the exhibition narrative and the layout of the exhibition, and how do I feel about that now, having lived with the exhibition for 3 months. So I'll try to do that today. And so the principal idea of the exhibition was to chart the first 10 years of Rembrandt's career. So from 1624, when he was still a young and hesitant artist in Leiden, until 1634, when he has already moved to Amsterdam and has become a member of the Painters Guild there in 1634. And so through these 10 years, we can really see and explore how Rembrandt was not necessarily born as a genius, but really had to work for his art, for his craft, to hone his technical skills. And I'm going to show you some radical examples, perhaps, where we can see Rembrandt's very first painting on the left, the Allegory of Sight. And then 8 years later, he paints the so-called Noble Slav from the Metropolitan Museum in New York. And so you can immediately see what a radical transformation that Rembrandt made through his painting. Similarly with the prints, I'm showing you one of his very earliest prints, The Rest on the Flight into Egypt, from around 1626, and then The Angel Appearing to the Shepherd from 1634. And again, you can see the skill and the mastery that Rembrandt has gained during these first 10 years of the exhibition. So what we really wanted to do is we wanted to look over Rembrandt's shoulder. We wanted to sort of explore what his working methods, what his techniques, how he improved, how he developed during these 10 years and across all the 3 media. And so this is a reconstruction of our opening wall in the exhibition, where we present the young Rembrandt to our visitors, both in drawing, painting, and print. And in the catalogue, in fact, apart from the introductory essays by the co-curators, we have grouped all the works of art from the exhibition in themes, in groups, in order to explore Rembrandt's working methods across these 3 media. And so it was quite challenging to translate that into a physical exhibition, because I sort of thought it would be more interesting to then pull these themes apart again and sort of dot them around the exhibition, not necessarily in a chronological way, but roughly chronological, and then make links with other works of art that Rembrandt was working on at the moment. And what I found really fascinating during that process is that when I went to the opening of the exhibition in Leiden, it was such a revelation, because we've both been working on the same catalogue, on the same research, but we hadn't really been involved with each other layout of the exhibition. And you generally couldn't have seen two more different Rembrandt exhibitions, both in Leiden and in Oxford, with roughly the same works of art. And I think that was really worthwhile to sort of see how we both came from different narratives, different angles, and both presented these really worthwhile, interesting exhibitions. So to just give you one example, so one of the themes in the catalogue is Rembrandt's self-portraiture. And so in Leiden, they grouped all the self-portraits. So you sort of could see him develop in front of your eyes in a roughly chronological order, from a very young 18-year-old to Rembrandt as a confident, successful artist. And so in Oxford, we sort of pulled them all apart. And what we did is we introduced each exhibition section through a self-portrait that was related to that self-portrait. So here we have a Leiden portrait introducing Rembrandt and Leiden. You can't really see it, but at the far end of the back wall, you see the tiny edge self-portraits, which are introducing Rembrandt's printmaking technique section. We have a portrait by Lievens of Rembrandt, introducing the Rembrandts and Lievens section. We have a portrait by Gerrit Douw of Rembrandt, introducing Rembrandt's workshop section, etc. Here, a portrait of Rembrandt in Amsterdam from 1633, introducing the Amsterdam section. So you get the gist. And so similarly, another theme in the catalogue was Tobit, and in Oxford, we've again separated these works of art. So for instance, the first painting, one of Rembrandt's earliest, dated 1626, is now on show in our first section called A Hesitant Start, in which we explore his first paintings, while the fabulous drawing from the Louvre in the middle, I've put that in the family, Meet Rembrandt and His Family section, because I'm convinced that it's a portrait, or at least a study of his father, which was then potentially used as an example for the Tobit and Anna painting, which is now in the National Gallery and which has gone back and forth between Rembrandt and Gerrit Douw. So I've placed that in the workshop of Rembrandt section of the exhibition. Similarly, the flight into Egypt, we could have all grouped them together on one wall to see the development, but the early prints are in Rembrandt's printmaking section. And for instance, the last painting in the lower right corner, dated 1634, is placed in Rembrandt's Amsterdam portrait. So you can see Rembrandt's rendition of the flight of Egypt in all of the galleries in the exhibition. Similarly, with another theme and one of Rembrandt's favorite subjects, the beggars, the homeless people that he would encounter in the streets of Leiden. In the exhibition catalogue and in Leiden, they're all grouped together. And in Oxford, for instance, we've placed some of them in our copper plate section, and you see them alongside some original copper plates from the Rembrandt house, but also to explain how Rembrandt was very experimental in his early printmaking days. And here we see how he cuts up the large plate of the Saint Jerome on the left into smaller fragments of copper, and then renders them into tiny copper plates, showing the beggars. Similarly, the theme of Saint Jerome, and so you see prints by Rembrandt, by Van Vliet, by Lievens. They've all, in fact, these have been grouped together in Oxford, but they sort of sit in between two of our main sections. One is Rembrandt's collaboration with Van Vliet, and one is Jan Lievens. So we've managed to find a place in the exhibition where they would sort of sit bang in between those two exhibition sections as well. And looking back at the great Saint Jerome that we just looked at, so I could have grouped that with the other Saint Jerome images, prints and paintings in the exhibition, but in fact I placed it in the first room when we're looking at this printmaking technique, as explained, because he cuts up the copper plate into different sections. But it then also allowed me to make a sort of more obscure link with the foot operation from Winterthur. And here you see a gallery shot with the foot operation on the far left, and then you see on the back wall the Saint Jerome hanging on the far right. And so it's just something that occurred to me that they're made around the same year, and so the pose of that leaning back and the clasping of the hands sort of seems inspired by one another, and so that's why I sort of hung them within eyesight of one another of the exhibition, so the visitors could make that subliminal link as well. And talking about Saint Jerome, like what struck me, and this is just one of my in-jokes as a curator, I guess, is how bad Rembrandt was at the beginning of his career. I'm drawing lions, and here are just a few examples from the Saint Jerome prints, but also from Rembrandt's lion hunts. And it's very obvious when you look at these animal studies that Rembrandt had no idea what a lion looked like. But of course, that would change a few years later, in the late 1630s, when Rembrandt would actually see a lion and lionesses and make studies of them. And I think Lara already showed this beautiful study from the Leiden collection in New York. But it's clear that in the young Rembrandt has never seen a lion. Here is one of those lion hunts. And this was a very sort of small discovery I did during the exhibition, because before that I was always intrigued by that triangular shape in the background. I don't know if you can see my cursor moving across the screen, but behind the lion hunt you see this triangular pyramidal shape sort of being scratched out. And I always wondered what it was, and I think in the catalogue I describe it as a pole. But once it hung on the wall in the exhibition, and probably the lighting in the exhibition contributed to it, and I shouldn't have had an excuse because it's kept in our building in Oxford in the Ashmolean, but it all of a sudden dawned upon me that it must be one of these cottages that Rembrandt sketched very often in his drawings and in his later prints. So you sort of see the gabled thatched roof of the cottage in the background. Other things that struck me during the exhibition was sort of more revelations, because obviously the Judas Repentant is one of our most pivotal paintings in the exhibition, which is also explained in the catalogue, but I'd never really seen it in real life. And I know you've had an exhibition on it in the Morgan Library in New York as well. And because it's in a private collection, there aren't great high-res photos of it. And so for me, it was very, very difficult to appreciate it before having seen it in the flesh. But the moment it arrived in the building, when we hung it in the gallery, it became very clear to me why it had been so important to Rembrandt's early career. And so similarly as in the Morgan, we've surrounded the painting by the drawings and the prints made before and after it. And this is a gallery shot, so you can sort of see the Judas painting on the far left, and then the drawings and the prints dotted in front of him. And that was another consideration, because in the catalogue you can illustrate all these prints and drawings and paintings alongside, but it was very difficult to do that in real life in the exhibition galleries. Not just because of lighting issues and light exposure, but also you didn't want to sort of make the works on paper feel secondary to the painting. So that's why we came up to showing the prints and the drawings on separate stands in the middle of the room. Another thing we were able to do in the exhibition is on the back of one of the preparatory studies is a study of legs, and in the exhibition we could then connect that to both the Judas painting and the Samson and Delilah painting, which was a nice touch for visitors to sort of stand in front of that one drawing and look at the two paintings side by side. Another thought, so when we were comparing the Samson and Delilah, so it's a theme that both Rembrandt and Lievens are working on. And if you look very closely, you can see that they've used the same model for the Delilah. But also, if you look even more closer, you see that they're using the same scissors, and perhaps they're just these standard scissors in Leiden in the 1620s. It just made me rethink the dating of these paintings. And so maybe in hindsight, we should have dated the Jan Lieven, Samson and Delilah a bit later in order to match more with Rembrandt's studies of the same subject dated between 1626 and 1628. Similarly, another sort of reflection that I had in hindsight is about the gorgeous drawing which is in the Getty Museum, and which you see in our gallery here on the far right. At the moment it hangs in the Rembrandt and Lievens section, and so you see Rembrandt and Lievens' interpretation of the raising of Lazarus on the left. And because I hung it in the Rembrandt and Leven section because it's thought to be a view by Rembrandt of the inside of his studio with Jan Levens admiring an arched painting on the easel in front of him. And then after the installation, it was quite fun that I actually sort of realized that the Raising of Lazarus by Rembrandt was in an arched format as well. But of course, it has nothing to do with the easel, with the painting on the easel in the drawing. And if I'd had my way, of course, I would have hung it in our section on Rembrandt and Van Vliet, where I'm exploring the Passion series that Rembrandt painted for the Prince of Orange. And unfortunately, we couldn't have the painting from Munich because it's protected, but at least we had the two prints made after it. But you can see from this photo how cramped that wall was, but it would have been great if I could have shown the Getty drawing alongside these painting, and you still see the arched shape in the first print after the painting. But then I guess the most important sort of revelation or research thought that I had during the exhibition is one of our own panels in the Ashmolean Museum. And in fact, you see it here. It's a tiny panel. It's barely 15 centimeters tall. We were presented it in 1951 as a Rembrandt painting. Then the Rembrandt Research Project came to examine it in 1972, and they finally published it 10 years later in the first volume of the corpus of Rembrandt paintings, and they rejected it as a Rembrandt. And so when they came to view it in Oxford, they couldn't see any stylistic correspondences with Rembrandt. They thought it was too roughly painted. It could never be by the master's hand. And they doubted if it was even based on an original work by Rembrandt in the first place. So they've published this, for those of you who know the corpus of Rembrandt paintings, they published it under one of their dreaded C numbers. And in fact, when I now browse through that first volume of the corpus, there's a lot of paintings in that final C section that I think we might need to re-examine again in the light of the recent discoveries in Oxford. So when we were working on the exhibition, I always sort of wondered, like, should we include this panel in the exhibition? Because it's, to me, it looks, at least, and I'm by no means a Rembrandt painting specialist, but at least it looks like something that Rembrandt could have painted in Leiden around 1630. And it's in our building, it's in our collection. On the back of the panel, there's an old 18th century label, which has been identified as an extract from an auction catalogue from 1777 from the Mont Blanc, a French collector. And we know that many paintings, for instance, from Mont Blanc's collection are currently in American collections, and it's described as Rembrandt. And of course, that doesn't prove anything if something is described in an 18th century French catalogue as Rembrandt. The corpus of Rembrandt, the Rembrandt Research Project, also identified other versions of the painting. For instance, this version in Euston in the Museum of Fine Arts, which you can see I think it's of lesser quality than the Ashmolean version, but it's clearly based on the same model. There's also a print that Ernst van de Wetering identified, and so it's in reverse. So if I now do a virtual flip of the print, you can see how it was based on a version of the painting, whether it's the Ashmolean version or a better original even, we don't know. But we had a breakthrough just after the opening of the exhibition when Peter Klein, who's the world specialist in dendrochronology, visited the Ashmolean Museum. And so we sneakily asked him if we could sort of put this tiny little panel from our basement store on his worktop, and if he could please analyze the tree rings in the panel. And so he came back to us a few days later, and so this is now a week after we opened the Young Rembrandt to the public, to say that in fact he had found a match with his vast database, with his data set, and he identified the wood onto which our panel is painted as coming from the same tree as the famous Andromeda by Rembrandt in the Hague in the Mauritshuis, and also Jan Levens's Rembrandt's mother painting in Dresden. So at least now we know that we could place the panel in the same context, and we were very happy to included in the exhibition as well. And I think when it comes down on Monday morning after the exhibition closes, it will be another exciting Rembrandt project for me to be working on. And as I already mentioned, there's a lot more of these Rembrandt rejected paintings in that C section of the first corpus of Rembrandt paintings catalogue. So I think I'll be traveling through that and contacting some of my colleagues. And for instance, a wonderful example is this Rembrandt head in the Agnes Ederson Art Centre in Kingston in Canada. So while I thought that my Rembrandt year would have finished on Sunday, I think it will still continue a bit longer for me, and hopefully I'll be talking about you some more in another talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Anne, for that rich look into your exhibition. It gives us lots to think about. I'm very pleased to welcome our next speaker, Peter Roelofs, who is the head of paintings and sculpture at the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. Peter specializes in 17th century Dutch painting and is currently part of the team of Operation Night Watch, the largest research and conservation project to date for Rembrandt's Night Watch. Since last year, as chairman of the jury, Peter participated in the Dutch television program Project Rembrandt, which I believe has just started its second season. From 2006 to 2017, Peter worked as curator of 17th century Dutch painting at the Rijksmuseum, where among a number of exhibition projects and a wide range of publications, he worked on the refurbishment of the 17th century Dutch galleries. A regular lecturer both in the Netherlands and abroad, Peter has also taught at various universities. And since earlier this year, he is a member of the International Advisory Board of the Center for Netherlandish Art in Boston. Today, Peter's talk is entitled Long Live Rembrandt, the Rijksmuseum and the Year of Rembrandt. Peter, welcome.
Laura, thank you very much to you and John for this wonderful symposium. And I think this is probably the first digital conference on Rembrandt ever. And it's wonderful to see how many of you are participating from your homes all around the globe right now. If you allow me, I would like to transport you to the Rijksmuseum, since the history of the Rijksmuseum is inextricably linked to Rembrandt. As early as 1808, the Rijksmuseum was entrusted by the city of Amsterdam with the care of the Night Watch and the syndics. And in 1885, at the opening of the new museum building, which is our current location, the Jewish bride from the bequest of the Amsterdam banker Adriaan van der Hoop was added as a loan from the city as well. And 12 years later, in 1897, this was followed by the generous loan of the portrait of Maria Tripp by the Van Weyden Family Foundation. 4 of Rembrandt's most iconic paintings were on loan in the Rijksmuseum at the time. However, the Rijksmuseum had been considerably less active and successful, I would say, in the field of acquisitions until that moment. Only 2 works, Salome receiving the head of John the Baptist, and the bust of an old man with gorget had been acquired as authentic paintings by the master. And since the middle of the 20th century, we have known that these attributions were based on loose sand. One is a copy, the other is a painting by an artist from Rembrandt's circle. It was only in 1900 when the first authentic painting by Rembrandt was acquired by the Rijksmuseum, the Stone Bridge. And over the past 120 years, thanks in part to the generous support of the Rembrandt Association, in Dutch the Vereniging Rembrandt, the Dutch state, companies, foundations, and especially private donors, like Mr. and Mrs. de Bruin van der Leeuw and Mr. and Mrs. Kessler-Hulsman, the Rijksmuseum has been able to bring together the world's most comprehensive and representative overview of authentic paintings, drawings, and prints by Rembrandt. The responsibility for this collection also requires us at the Rijksmuseum, we believe, as curators, conservators, scientists, and educators, not only to constantly continue and innovate our research into the art of our greatest 17th century Dutch master, but also to feel it our duty to make every new generation acquainted with Rembrandt and his work. Every generation deserves its own major Rembrandt exhibition. Since the late 19th century, the Rijksmuseum has devoted a large number of important shows to Rembrandt. First in 1898, in the Stedelijk Museum on the occasion of the inauguration of Queen Wilhelmina, then in 1935, 1956, 1969, and more recently in 1991, 2006, and 2015. Through these projects, we are able to bring Rembrandt time and again into the hearts and minds of new generations. We encourage new visions, enthuse young people to immerse themselves in art and culture, and keep our cultural heritage relevant for now and the future. Having said this, it was natural for us to participate in the new year of Rembrandt in 2019, the 350th anniversary of Rembrandt's death, honoring Rembrandt and devoting extra attention to the artist, his work, his contemporaries, and the 17th century. No less than 5 museums in the Netherlands, the Mauritshuis, Lakenhal, Rembrandthuis Museum, Fries Museum, and Rijksmuseum, besides the Amsterdam Museum, marked Rembrandt's 350th anniversary. An extraordinary year full with exhibitions, publications, and special events celebrating the work of, we believe, one of the world's greatest artists, if not the greatest. We inaugurated the year with 150 Rembrandts, real Rembrandts, the youngest 11 months, the eldest 75 years old, 5 even fully named Rembrandt van Rijn. With 3 major exhibitions, the Rijksmuseum set out to provide our public with knowledge and inspiration, to invite them to make their own art in the wake of the great master, and to look at the art of Rembrandt and his contemporaries from an international perspective. In the Rijksmuseum, the year-long celebration started with all the Rembrandts, in which we presented for the first time in the history of the museum an exhibition with all 22 accepted paintings, 60 drawings, and more than 300 of the finest examples of Rembrandt's prints in our collection. All the Rembrandts of the Rijksmuseum offered our visitors the opportunity to explore Rembrandt, the artist, the human, the storyteller, and the innovator. In 3 months, we welcomed about 455,000 visitors to this exhibition, which is a large number for a show fully based on our own collection, as you might imagine. In January 2019, we sent out an open invitation to make art for a Rijksmuseum summer exhibition. Will your work be hanging in the Rijksmuseum this summer? The main source of inspiration for this show was, of course, Rembrandt himself. This is something that we had never done before. Amateurs or professional artists, no matter what their age, were welcomed to submit a self-made artwork. And following this open call, we received more than 8,000 entries from 95 countries all around the globe. The youngest artist just 2 years old, the oldest over 90. Most of these submitted artworks were paintings, photographs, or drawings, but he also included embroidery, sculpture, glass, woodwork, tiles, fashion, furniture, and videos. It was really heartwarming to see that Rembrandt is still inspiring people of all ages and all backgrounds. An expert jury of curators, educators, artists, and even a secondary school student selected 575 artworks made by 693 people, including over 250 children. The themes of the exhibition emerged from similarities between works made by the many different artists. In fact, together they wrote the concept of the exhibition. We just had to bring it together. The themes included, among others, the Night Watch, portraits of people as they are, light and dark, and Rembrandt the storyteller. In Long Live Rembrandt, we saw the master through the eyes of the artists. The exhibition was, I may say, really a joyful celebration of creativity and a wonderful tribute to Rembrandt. And all of the works together made one single Gesamtkunstwerk, a total work of art. The third exhibition of the year was something completely different again. Rembrandt Velázquez, Dutch and Spanish masters, was the result of a special partnership between the Rijksmuseum and the Museo Nacional del Prado in Madrid, marking the year of Rembrandt and the 200th anniversary of the Prado. In this exhibition, we looked at Rembrandt from a more international perspective. The exhibition focused on the 17th century, which has, as you all know, become known as the golden age of painting in both the Netherlands and Spain. And it was a tremendous artistic achievement that saw the emergence of two of the greatest painters in history, Rembrandt and Velázquez, the leading artists of their respective countries. Both masters worked in a climate that include many other painters who enjoyed great reputation, such as Zurbarán and Murillo in Spain, and Vermeer and Frans Hals in the Netherlands. So the question was, what would happen if we would combine these two traditions in one show? And the exhibition showed that in a time of war and political tensions, Dutch and Spanish painting approach closer to each other than it is generally thought. King Willem-Alexander of the Netherlands and King Felipe of Spain officially opened the Rembrandt Velázquez exhibition at the Rijksmuseum. 60 paintings by Rembrandt, Velázquez, and other artists were displayed alongside each other in pairs, combining two works from each country, resulting in what we believe were fascinating and often surprising visual dialogues. Each pair had a story behind, a specific theme that brought the two paintings together. A wide variety of themes was therefore represented, from concepts such as religion, faith, wealth, or love, to artistic challenges such as composition, light, and shadow. Last year, the Rijksmuseum published 4 Rembrandt books: Biography of a Rebel, written by Rijksmuseum curator of 17th century Dutch painting Jonathan Bicker, who in a very accessible way brings Rembrandt to life, I would say. And then the second book is the comprehensive catalogue, Rembrandt and Rijksmuseum, edited by Erik Hinterding, curator of prints in the Rijksmuseum, presenting for the first time all the paintings, drawings, and prints by Rembrandt in the Rijksmuseum collection, together in one book. And the catalogue Rembrandt Velázquez, edited by the Rijksmuseum head of fine arts, Gregor Weber, accompanied the exhibition about the two renowned artists and their painting traditions. And last but not least, for the youngest generation, we published the children's book Miffy and Rembrandt, a bestseller. Volume 2 of our scholarly collection catalogue, 17th century Dutch paintings in the Rijksmuseum, focusing on artists born between 1600 and 1620, including Rembrandt and many of his pupils, will be published online early next year. You might have noticed that there is still one painting by Rembrandt in the Rijksmuseum collection that we have not put in the spotlight yet, his Night Watch, the beating heart of the Rijksmuseum building, visited in average years by more than 2 million art lovers from all around the globe. Rembrandt's group portrait of officers and other civic guardsmen of District 2 in Amsterdam, under the command of Captain Frans Banning-Kok and Lieutenant Willem van Ruitenburg, as it's officially named, is the artist's most ambitious painting, as you all know. It's Rembrandt's only civic guard piece, and it's famed among other things for the lively and daring composition that portrays the troop in active poses rather than the traditional static ones. Last summer, we started Operation Night Watch, the biggest and most wide-ranging research and conservation project in the history of Rembrandt's masterpiece. The main goal of the project is the long-term preservation of the painting. And we are currently looking at questions regarding the original commission and original appearance, Rembrandt's materials and painting technique, the impact of previous treatments and later interventions, as well as the aging, degradation, current state, and future of the painting. The research methods and technologies we are using include art historical and archival research, and the latest and most advanced research techniques, ranging from scientific and technical research to computer science and artificial intelligence. The outcome of the research will be a treatment plan that will form the basis for the conservation or even restoration of the painting. For this research project, the Night Watch has been unframed, as you might see in this image, and placed on a specially designed easel. 2 platform lifts make it possible to study the entire canvas, which measures about 380 centimeters in height and 450 centimeters in width. And the entire operation takes place in an ultra-transparent glass chamber designed by the French architect Jean-Michel Wilmot, who is also responsible for the interior design of the full Rijksmuseum. So the visiting public can follow the whole project, and the project can also be followed online at the Rijksmuseum website. The research team working on the Night Watch is made up of more than 20 Rijksmuseum scientists, conservators, curators, and photographers. And we are also collaborating with museums in the Netherlands and abroad, including the Dutch Cultural Heritage Agency, Delft University of Technology, University of Amsterdam, Amsterdam University Medical Center, University of Antwerp, and the National Gallery of Art in Washington. One thing I very much would like to share with you today. The Rijksmuseum recently published the largest and most detailed ever photograph of the Night Watch on our website, making it possible to zoom in on individual brushstrokes and even particular particles of pigment in the painting. Our imaging team made this photograph from a total of 528 exposures. In real, it's much sharper than the image that I'm sharing right now. The 24 rows of 22 pictures were stitched together digitally with the aid of neural networks, and the final image is made up of 44.8 gigapixels, which is enormous, and the distance between each pixel is 20 micrometers, so that's something that has never done before, and it's really, really helpful since it enables us and the scientists to study the painting in more detail remotely, which is really helpful in these challenging times, I would say. And we now see details such as pigment particles that normally would be invisible to the naked eye. The image will also be used to accurately track and future aging processes taking place in the painting, and offers our audience the opportunity to zoom into the minute detail to the painting. So this is all visible through the Rijksmuseum website. To finish my talk, Rembrandt lives. Rembrandt's appeal is alive and well, 350 years after the artist's death. The proof is there in the many initiatives, like this symposium, events, exhibitions, and publications, the large number of exhibition goers, as well as in the use of educational resources, both in the museums and online. This enormous international enthusiasm underlines once again that Rembrandt is not only an old master and his art Dutch national heritage. No, great art is always contemporary, and Rembrandt's art is world heritage. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Peter. That was wonderful. Our next speaker joins us also from the Rijksmuseum, Ilona van Tuinen, the curator of drawings of the 16th and 17th centuries. Ilona studied art history at the universities of Utrecht and Amsterdam and worked at the Museum de Lagenhal, as well as at the Leiden Collection in New York, the Fondation Custodia in Paris. And before taking up her current post in 2018 at the Rijksmuseum, she held the position of Annette and Oscar de la Renta Assistant Curator of Drawings and Prints at the Morgan. Ilona's publications include articles in journals such as Semiolis and Master of Drawings, as well as the exhibition catalog Power and Grace, Drawings by Rubens, Van Dyck, and Jordans, which was shown at the Morgan in 2018. Ilona will speak today on Rembrandt's drawings, New Directions. Ilona?
Hi, thank you so much, Lara, for that introduction, and hi to everyone out there. It's a bit strange to be sitting in my living room, but to know that you're all out there, thank you for joining. Today, indeed, I'm going to talk about Rembrandt's drawings, New Directions, and I'm going to see if I can, get to the next slide. Here we go. As the Austrian art historian and great scholar of Rembrandt's drawings, Otto Benesch, noted in 1960, I quote, Rembrandt's drawings form the part of his oeuvre to which scientific consideration was given last. Whereas his etchings had already been catalogued in the 18th and his paintings at the beginning of the 19th century, the drawings were not catalogued until the beginning of the 20th century in Hofstede de Groot's fundamental work, end quote. Now, there are several reasons why Rembrandt's drawings came last, or I should say, why his paintings and prints came first. One of those reasons is numbers. The latest count of Rembrandt's prints in the authoritative New Holstein edition by Eric Hinterding and Jaco Rutgers is 313, down from the roughly 400 catalogued by Adam von Bartsch, not counting, of course, the numerous state changes and different states. As for the paintings, in part 6, the final part of the corpus of Rembrandt paintings, Ernst van de Wetering catalogued roughly similar number, 324, which is a significant reduction from the 624 counted by Abraham Bredius, to name but one of several early catalogers of Rembrandt's paintings. Now, these numbers, roughly 300 prints and roughly 300 paintings, are small compared to Rembrandt's oeuvre of drawings. Hofstede de Groot's 1906 catalogue that Benesch alluded to lists around 1,600 works, and Benesch's own magnum opus, the 6th volume, The Drawings of Rembrandt, published between 1954 and 1957, catalogues around 1,400. Additionally, Werner Samowski in his 10-volume Drawings by the Rembrandt School included another 2,500 drawings by artists in Rembrandt's close vicinity. Now, a lot has happened since Benesch wrote those words in 1960. Eminent Rembrandt drawing scholars Peter Schatborn, Martin Rolton Kish, Holm Bevers, and Bill Robinson devoted large parts of their careers to refining the corpus compiled by Benesch and to contextualizing the drawings in terms of function, quality, drawing pedagogy, and artistic intent. Just last year, in 2019, Peter Schatborn's much anticipated Taschen publication of the complete drawings appeared. Meanwhile, Martin Rolton Kish's ongoing critical online revision of Otto Benesch's The Drawings by Rembrandt is rapidly expanding. At the same time, however, relatively new non-invasive imaging techniques such as macro-XRF and multimodal forensic imaging are yielding promising new insights into Rembrandt's supports, drawing media, and the original appearance of his drawings, which may have far-reaching consequences for the way in which we understand and describe this part of his oeuvre. And here you see some images of the conference entitled Drawings by Rembrandt, Connecting Art History, Science and Conservation, held in February of this year, which was hosted by the Rijksmuseum, the Cultural Heritage Agency of the Netherlands, which is the RCE, and the Rembrandt House Museum as part of an interdisciplinary research initiative called Drawing Out Rembrandt, or DORE, but more on that later. Again, this technical research comes late compared to the fields of Rembrandt prints, in which the watermarks were, of course, analyzed on a grand scale by Eric Henterding, and especially paintings, where technical examination was a major component of the Rembrandt research projects from its foundation in 1968 onwards. Here again, the sheer number of drawings is a reason why comprehensive technical investigation has not been possible, along with the fact that most technical methods used in other fields were either too invasive or simply unsuitable. Another reason is that you need a lot of data, preferably from as many institutions as possible, in order to make any larger observations, something which is only really starting to become possible in the digital age. So in this talk, I would like to take stock of the current state of the field of Rembrandt drawings. I will first say a few brief words about Schapborn's and Rembrandt Kisch's publications, and after that I will talk some more about Drawing Out Rembrandt. Now, as somebody who has started to look at Rembrandt drawings in earnest relatively recently, I can only express the deepest admiration and gratitude for the monumental work that is reflected in the recent publications by Schapborn and Rembrandt Kisch. As the latter so aptly writes in his introduction, I quote, "The vagaries of connoisseurship are obvious to those who practice it, and attempts to catalogue Rembrandt's work seem to lay the fragility of the enterprise particularly bare," end quote. Both authors have thoroughly scrutinized, contemplated, and absorbed the large body of drawings by Rembrandt and his school in a thoughtful way that demands our deepest respect. Schapborn's catalogue is the first complete corpus of Rembrandt drawings since the one by Benesch almost 3/4 of a century ago, and the first to reproduce all the drawings in color. It is the only book in existence, in fact, that you can pick up and leaf through and get a good feel for Rembrandt as a draftsman. It is arranged thematically, which enables comparison by subjects that Rembrandt treated at different stages of his career, such as these lions from around 1650 and 1660. But it is therefore not always conducive for getting an idea of Rembrandt's artistic development. It presents a vast reduction of the oeuvre Benesch assembled, almost half, but its function as attachment publication prevents any critical commentary or arguments for inclusion or exclusion of the drawings in the catalogue. Those who know Schapborn's painstaking scholarship know where to find his thoughts on the many drawings he did write about during his long career, but that will still leave many drawings unaccounted for. One of the most valuable aspects of the catalogue is that it is the summation of his career and a presentation of his vision, one that we were all so eager to know. Rembrandt Kisch, following Benesch, is chronological, contains in-depth critical remarks for each drawing, and is more inclusive since he works with 4 categories of attribution. He has Rembrandt with an asterisk for documentary drawings, Rembrandt for drawings he considers to be by Rembrandt, Rembrandt ? For attributed to or possibly by Rembrandt, and Rembrandt ? which is unlikely but not impossible. And it is in that last category that you see this drawing in the private collection, which has largely been ignored in the literature, but which he maintains in the selection. In this vision, there's room for a gray area. After all, as he writes in his introduction, an artist as experimental and surprising as Rembrandt should not be confined to an overly stylistic straitjacket. And this way, all drawings can be included about which opinions are divided. Rembrandt Kisch has completed his revisions of volumes 1 and 2, so that's numbers 1 to 476, and he's still working on volume 3, it's well underway. And just yesterday, in fact, he published his commentary on number 518A, which he frequently publishes new entries and updates the literature. Now, when comparing the two visions, it is clear that Rembrandt Kisch and Schapborn agree on the lion's share of attributions. Interestingly, their differences do not only exist in the gray areas. There are several drawings like this one, which Rembrandt Kisch considers definitely Rembrandt's, and Schapborn did not include in his catalogue, and there are examples of the reverse. This, of course, is inevitable. As both scholars readily admit, each vision is objective, but it's also personal, which leaves the possibility for discussion along the edges of their visions. Now, I would like to turn to Drawing Out Rembrandt, as I promised. So, Drawing Out Rembrandt which was created in 2017, is a research group consisting of paper conservators, scientists, and art historians from the Rijksmuseum, the RCE, and the University of Amsterdam and Utrecht, under the umbrella of the Netherlands Institute for Conservation, Art and Science. It currently consists of the following 10 members listed on this slide, and important to note here are the 2 scientific members for heritage on paper at the RCE, Birgit Rijsland and Frank Lichterink, whose dissertation research forms the core of DO-RE, as we call Drawing Out Rembrandt. Birgit's dissertation, entitled Drawing in the Age of Rembrandt, Implements, Techniques and Changes over Time, under Jeroen Stumpel's supervision, looks at Rembrandt's drawing supports, his drawing implements, so the quills, the reed pens, the chalks, the different inks, and where they all came from, or what they consist of and how they changed over time. Frank's dissertation, entitled Ink Time, Physics Simulations for Interdisciplinary Investigation of Historic Drawings under Rob Ertmann's supervision, seeks to create physics-based color reconstructions of the original appearance of Rembrandt's drawings, as well as computer simulations of the life of drawings from the moment they were created until the present day. Now, the objects for Birgit's and Frank's research are the rich collection of roughly 60 drawings in the collection of the Rijksmuseum, 60 drawings by Rembrandt. Now, the overarching goals of the DO-RE projects are threefold: to reconstruct the past, to analyze the present, and to predict the future of Rembrandt's drawings, whereby the latter 2 pertain primarily to conservation, since they deal with the present condition of the drawing, and they predict what the original appearance, and they predict something else, how the condition will change. Now, in reconstructing the past, the goal is to figure out what the original appearance of the drawing was, and therefore Rembrandt's intentions. Attention is paid to the types of paper at Rembrandt's disposal and their original color, a bit about which I'm going to speak in a little while. Ink analysis using macro XRF is vital to analyze the inks. In many cases, as we know, Rembrandt used iron gall ink, which was a rich blue-black to start with, but which turned brown over time. And Leonore van Sloten will show you Frank Lichtering's reconstruction of a Rembrandt drawing in her talk, and you'll be stunned by how vastly different its appearance is. Analysis of the opaque whites in Rembrandt's drawings is also part of the research, about which I'm going to speak a little bit later. And finally, it is a fervent wish of the DO-RE members to be able to digitally reconstruct the ductus, that is to say, the direction, the sequence, and the speed with which the pen strokes were placed on the paper. Rembrandt's handwriting, so to speak. Whether or not this will be possible remains unclear at this point, but if it will, could this potentially be a tool to aid modern connoisseurship? As I promised, I will now say something briefly about these 2 points based on lectures that were given at the symposium in February last year. Now, as for the different types of paper, it has long been noted that Rembrandt used different types of paper during his career. On the left, you see the so-called cardoespapier, or cartridge paper. And on the right, you see a high-quality ledger paper, which was writing paper, which was well-sized to ensure that the ink would not bleed and therefore more expensive. But how often did Rembrandt use these papers and why? And what about the so-called regular papers? What is regular paper? Are they all the same? Did quality play into his choice of papers for particular kinds of drawings? Did he use the same papers for his prints as he did for his drawings? We are only now starting to look at the types, quality, and density of the papers Rembrandt used. And in an ideal scenario, we would develop a standardized way of describing these papers, which could be included in collection catalogs. Now, coming out of that issue is the question of paper color, and especially the question whether or not Rembrandt toned his papers, and if so, why. At the conference in February, I presented a paper on this topic with paper conservator Leila Sauvage. And this drawing of Rembrandt's wife Saskia in the Rijksmuseum collection catalogue is catalogued as being made on paper toned with a light brown wash. It is one of 15 drawings in the Rijksmuseum collection that is currently catalogued that way. Of course, Rembrandt's teacher, Pieter Lasman, is usually credited with having introduced this technique to Rembrandt. And in the case of Lasman's drawings, the brushstrokes with which the wash was applied are clearly visible with the naked eye. And also, there's always a clear difference between the prepared recto and the unprepared verso. Of the 15 drawings that I just mentioned in the Rijksmuseum's collection, only one actually appears to have been made on prepared paper. It is laid down, so we cannot check the verso, but examination with the microscope appears to show the lighter tone of the paper coming through in an abraded area at bottom left, and the irregularities in the sky visible with the naked eye suggest application with some kind of wash. Now, the fact that the Rijksmuseum drawing is a landscape makes sense. Rembrandt appears to have prepared several of his landscape drawings from the early 1650s with a brown wash, as this beautiful drawing in the Morgan Library shows. But there is a large group of drawings made in the 1630s, of which you see the ones in the Rijksmuseum, but which are dispersed over all sorts of collections that all have the same yellowish paper and which have therefore all been described as having been made on toned paper, toned by Rembrandt. But what kind of paper is this? Why did it discolor? Does it have to do with the sizing or with the iron gall ink that Rembrandt used, with the structure of the paper? We are simply not sure yet. And here you see a decision tree, which was created by Leila Sauvage and part of our talk that might be of use in identifying toned paper in the future. And now, as promised, a few words about Rembrandt's use of opaque white, just to finish. Here you see the Rijksmuseum's drawing Saskia by a window again, in which the whitish areas, visible especially around her proper right elbow and in her face, have traditionally been identified as lead white, which we know Rembrandt used in many drawings, presumably for making corrections. Now, these passages in Rembrandt's drawings are notoriously hard to read, partially because lead white often oxidizes into a grayish black. Here, however, you see a false color compilation by Frank Lichterink of a macro XRF scans made by Leila Sauvage, which Birgit presented at our symposium in February. The red parts reflect the presence of iron gall ink, which is definitely very much present. Interestingly, calcium here in green and sulfur here in blue appear in exactly the same spots, exactly where the application of the white took place. Now, this combination, as Birgit Frank and Rob Ertman discovered, suggests that Rembrandt was here not using lead white, but gypsum instead. This is a fascinating new discovery, and it raises new questions about the different functions of Rembrandt's whites. Was gypsum perhaps more transparent? And if so, did Rembrandt use it deliberately to create intended light effects rather than corrections? Now, to conclude, just before I conclude, it is important to mention that Doré is not alone and that other significant technical research is being done on drawings by Rembrandt, most notably at the Kupferschichtkabinett in Berlin and at the Klassik Stiftung in Weimar, both of which presented talks as invited speakers at the Rijksmuseum conference in February. Another project is I was mentioning, which is the WIRE project, headed by Rick Johnson at Cornell, about which you'll hear more in Leonore van Sloten's talk. So can technical research be incorporated into drawings connoisseurship the way it has been in the paintings field? And if so, where can it be of particular interest or help or importance? There is a lot that we do not know yet, but it is our hope that it will reveal patterns, habits, and preferences of Rembrandt's that might aid connoisseurship, which of course itself is indispensable. In any case, I hope that you all agree that this is an exciting time for the field of Rembrandt drawings and that the future of this fascinating body of works by this phenomenal artist is bright, thanks to all the work that has been done, to all the work that lies ahead, and to the ways in which old and new inform each other. Thank you very much.